Hi, and welcome to this course. My name is Maximilian Schwarzmuller, and I will be your instructor in this course. I will take you from Vue novice to expert, and I will share all my knowledge with you to turn you into an advanced Vue.js developer. We'll start at the very basics, the core syntax and the question why exactly we need Vue. And we will then gradually build up knowledge, dig deeper into Vue and into the advanced concepts it has to offer, and you will therefore learn all about Vue, which you need to build any kind of Vue application that you want to build. Now, this course is not a theoretical course. We will get our hands dirty. We got plenty of projects, plenty of assignments and practices, demo projects. It's all in there so that you learn Vue in a hands-on approach, really writing code yourself, at least if you want to. Of course, you can also just follow along the videos and learn it step by step by doing that. Now, with this course, you will not just learn the basics, but also advanced topics like the composition API that was introduced with Vue.js version 3. And speaking of Vue.js version 3, I released this course in 2016 with Vue.js 2. Now, since then, Vue.js evolved, and I completely updated and re-recorded this course from scratch when Vue.js version 3 was released, simply to give you the best possible learning experience. And that's what this course is about. Now, I would say let's not waste any time. Instead, let's start with the most important question first. What exactly is Vue.js?
So, what is Vue.js, or just Vue as it's also called? Vue.js is a JavaScript framework that makes building interactive and reactive web frontends, which are basically web applications that run in the browser, so in the end what the user sees, easier. This is a nice sentence, and it would be a correct definition, but it might not be too helpful. So let me make this a bit clearer, and let's highlight the important parts here. And of course, one important part is JavaScript. Vue.js is for JavaScript, and it uses JavaScript. It's all about JavaScript because JavaScript is the programming language which we can use in the browser. We can run it in the browser after a page was loaded by the user. It allows us to manipulate what the user sees on the screen without fetching a new page from the server. And that allows us to provide rich user experiences, and I'll come back to this rich user experiences point in just a second. But it's not just for JavaScript. Indeed, Vue.js is a JavaScript framework. Now, what does framework mean? Framework, not just in JavaScript, but in any programming language, is basically a third-party library, which means it's code not written by you, but by someone else, which exposes certain utility functionalities, certain methods, certain tools which you don't have to write on your own. And that's important, unlike a regular library, a framework is a library that does not just give you those extra functionalities, but which also gives you a set of rules, you could say. It gives you a clear guidance, a clear approach that you should follow when it comes to building your application. It basically gives you a clear idea and structure of how to write your application code. So it's the utility functions plus the rules. Now, why would we use Vue.js? We also have that in the sentence, because with it we can build interactive and reactive web frontends. Reactive is a pretty fancy term, but in the end what it means is that our app should be very responsive to what the user does. If a user enters something on the screen, we want to be able to react to that, for example, to show validation errors below an input field. We want to be able to show overlays with warning messages. We want to give a user a very modern look and feel in our web application. Often we try to achieve what we know from mobile apps, and I'll come back to that as well. So we want to provide a great user experience in the end, and Vue.js makes it easier for us to achieve that. And the web frontends part is also important. This basically means that Vue.js is involved with what the user sees. It's not a server-side framework. We don't use it with PHP or with Node. Well, we can use it with all of that, but simply in a combination, but it doesn't help us write better PHP or Node.js code because Vue.js is for the browser-side JavaScript. With HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and possibly Vue.js in the browser, we can control what the user sees, and we can provide a rich user interface in the web. And Vue.js is a framework that helps us with building such a JavaScript-driven user interface running in the browser for our web application that might be talking to a server, but it's all about the browser-side code that helps us achieve that. Now, why would we use something like Vue.js? Why would we want this reactive web frontend? Well, let's take a step back and let's not think about web applications. Let's think about mobile applications. Mobile applications are very responsive. Things happen instantly. We basically have like one screen where we add overlays, where we render lists. We can navigate to different screens with a smooth animation. It all feels like one unit, you could say. So mobile apps and also desktop apps feel very reactive. We don't have to wait for new pages to load. We don't have to wait for HTML to be downloaded and rendered by the browser. Instead, the entire user interface is already there. The entire user interface is part of the mobile app the user installed. And the only thing that might be loaded behind the scenes is data. Now, in web apps traditionally, we click a link and we wait for a new page to load. And that happens over and over again. We might enter some data in a form, we click a button, that data is submitted, and as a response, we get a new HTML page. So in a traditional web page, we wait for responses all the time. JavaScript can help us here. JavaScript can speed this up, and JavaScript in the browser allows us to provide a more modern web application, a more modern user interface. JavaScript has the huge advantage of running in the browser on the loaded page. That means we have a language running in the browser which can be used to change that page without fetching new HTML behind the scenes. Instead, we can manipulate the HTML structure, the so-called DOM, document object model, of a page with JavaScript. And that means that in modern JavaScript-driven web applications, we're not sending a request to get a new HTML page. Instead, we only do this once, and thereafter, we just exchange data behind the scenes, and we use client-side JavaScript and possibly frameworks like Vue to update what's on the screen. And we're using solutions like Vue.js because just JavaScript may not be ideal. Theoretically, we can build any kind of web application with just vanilla JavaScript. So with just JavaScript without any extra frameworks or libraries. No framework like Vue is needed in reality, but it wouldn't be much fun to use just JavaScript because we have to write all the code, all the logic on our own. We have to reinvent the wheel over and over again. We might even write suboptimal code and introduce errors and bugs because we have to write everything from scratch. And we have to do these things correctly, otherwise we might have poor performance or security issues. Working in a team might also be harder because not everyone knows our code structure, the philosophy behind our code, and how to use our code. And that's why we use something like Vue. It gives us a clear rule set in which we have to work, which everyone in a team has to use, and we don't have to figure out all the small nitty-gritty details like updating a part on the page. Instead, we can focus on our core business logic with Vue and let Vue do the heavy lifting of updating the page and of doing all the annoying stuff which we would have to do otherwise. That's why we use frameworks like Vue, and throughout the course this will become obvious once we dive into all the features Vue offers and how easy those features make it to build amazing web applications and user interfaces. So now you have a rough idea of what Vue is and why you might want to use it. In case you're not fully convinced yet, no worries, we'll see it all in action very soon. There is one important thing to realize about using Vue though. We can use View in two main ways, you could say. We can use it to control parts of an HTML page and make that part a bit more reactive and interactive. So we could, for example, control the sidebar on a page to load elements there dynamically. Or we have like a chat overlay which the user can open up, and that chat overlay is controlled by View. So we don't have to control everything on the page with it. We don't have to use View for everything on a page if we don't have any reactivity. If we don't need an interactive element somewhere on our screen, we don't have to use View for it. And we can therefore use View to build so-called widgets. And that's not a general term, that's just a term I came up with. We control parts of a page by dumping in small widgets like a chat screen, like an interactive sidebar, and other parts on the page are totally not affected by View. The opposite, the other way of using View, would be that everything on a page is controlled with View. So every element is rendered and controlled by View. This is the so-called single page application approach, where the server only ever sends one HTML page, which includes basically no markup, but all the script imports we need, importing View and our View code. And thereafter, our View code defines what should be rendered on the screen in the browser after the page was loaded. Now, there also are some mixtures, but you will learn all about that, all about those two approaches in great detail throughout the course. We're going to start with the left approach because that's easier to get into View, but we'll then also move to the other approach, to the everything is controlled by View approach, so that by the end of the course, you feel comfortable using either of the two approaches, and you will also know when to use which approach. Because it turns out there is no better approach. These approaches are simply good for different things. And throughout the course, this will become very, very clear. It's also worth mentioning that we have alternatives to View. Vue.js, of course, is the focus of this course, and here we will learn all about Vue. Vue will turn out to be a complete component-based UI framework, and you will learn what component-based means throughout the course, no worries. And it's a framework that includes basically all core features you need to build modern web applications. Now you already see that it has one downside, and that is that it's a bit less popular than React and Angular. Now I'll get back to the downside in a second, but of course the first important question is, what is React and what is Angular? Well, React is one alternative to Vue. It's basically also a JavaScript framework, though officially it's just a library because it has less features than Vue actually. It only focuses on rendering UIs, and it misses some features like routing, which Vue offers out of the box. You will learn what routing is in this course, by the way. And therefore, React.js is very popular indeed, but it actually also depends quite a bit on community packages, whereas Vue has everything built in. Now, Angular is yet another alternative, yet another framework which you could use, and it actually has a bit more features than Vue, so it helps you with even more problems that you could possibly have. It's therefore especially popular in the enterprise world, though big companies are using all three frameworks. There are large companies using React, there are large companies using Angular, and there are large companies using Vue. And like Vue, and also like React is component-based, it actually uses TypeScript. Vue also supports this, but it's optional. In Angular, it's basically mandatory. And for smaller projects, you could say that Angular could be overkill because of all its features. But of course, that always basically comes down to personal preference, I would say. In general, all three are very popular and used a lot. Vue is a bit less popular amongst big companies, but there definitely are large companies using it. And attached to this lecture, you also find a more detailed comparison article which you can dive into, though you will get the most out of this article if you come back to it later once you learn a bit more about Vue. For now, it's enough to keep these alternatives in mind, and then you can explore them once you know more about Vue, because good news also is that if you ever would want to switch to a different alternative, once you learned one of these three, switching will be easier, because whilst they of course do have different code which you write, they do have fairly similar concepts, and therefore switching isn't too hard. Now, these are the Vue alternatives. And now that's enough of the theory, I would say. Why don't we now simply get started by writing some Vue code and getting a first feeling for how Vue works? So, in order to get our hands dirty, I prepared a very simple dummy project for you. You find it attached to this lecture as a zip file, which you can download and extract. And in that extracted folder, you will find three files: an app.js file, an index.html file, and a styles CSS file. Now here I opened this extracted folder with Visual Studio Code, the code editor I'm going to use throughout this course. Now you can use any code editor or IDE of your choice. You don't need a specific tool, but I strongly recommend Visual Studio Code, which you can get for free from code.visualstudio.com. It's available for Mac OS, Windows, and Linux, so you can use it on any platform, and you can simply download and install it from that page. And once you did that, you can open the attached extracted folder with File, Open, and then navigate to that folder and open it. You can close the welcome screen you might see in Visual Studio Code. And if you want to get the exact same look as I do, under View, Appearance, you can control which sidebars are visible or not visible. And I only have the sidebar and the editor area open. I, for example, don't have the activity bar, which you might still have. I'm also zoomed in here, and under Code, Preferences, Color Theme, I am using the Dark Plus theme. Now you can configure this however you want, but that is the style I am using. Now with that, let's start writing some code. And I will actually start by writing some non-Vue code first, so that we thereafter can see why using a framework like Vue.js might be a good idea. On this demo project which I prepared, we can add goals. We got a test goal at the moment, and we will delete that soon. But now whenever I add a new goal here, like finish the course, I want to make sure that when add goal is clicked, this goal appears in that list down there. In the index.html file, we got some markup for that: input field, label, button, and then that list with the dummy list item, which we can delete now. And I'm importing some styles which I prepared for you. We don't have to care about those. It's not a CSS course after all. But we do also import app.js. And here we can write some JavaScript code to fetch the user input when the button is clicked, create a new list item, and add that to that list of list items here. And that's what I want to do first now, with just JavaScript, so without Vue. In app.js for that, we first of all need to get access to the input so that we can read the entered value. We need to get access to the button so that we can listen to click events on the button. And we need to get access to the unordered list here so that we can add new list items. Therefore, I will create three constants here in app.js. The first one is the button L constant, let's say. This name, of course, is up to you, where I use document query selector to select the only button we have on this page. So now a pointer to that DOM element, to that JavaScript object representation of that button element, is stored in this button L const. I'll do the same for the input element with document query selector input, and also for the list element with document query selector UL for unordered list. Now we can add a click listener with JavaScript to this button by reaching out to the button L and calling add event listener, where we then listen to the click event like this by passing click as a string as a first argument. The second argument now needs to be the function that should be executed when that click occurs. For that, we can define a new function here. Add goal could be the name, which should be triggered upon a click. So here we can then point at add goal. We don't execute it here. We just point at it by repeating its name so that the function is executed for us when a click occurs. Now in this function, we want to get whatever the user entered. So we can get the entered value by reaching out to input_l.value. Being an input element at which we're pointing here, it will have a value property. That's vanilla JavaScript, that's built into JavaScript, that we have this value property on input elements, where we then can extract the value the user entered into this input. And now we can create a new list item element by calling document create element, which is a built-in method provided by the browser to create new DOM elements programmatically with JavaScript. Here we can provide li to create a list item element, and then we can use that newly created list item element to set its text content, so the text between the opening and closing tags of that list item, equal to the entered value. And then we can reach out to the list L, so to our overall list, and call append or append child. Both will work here. I'll go for append child, and append our list item L, which we just created. If we do all of that and we reload, I can add finish the course and add this goal. And thereafter, for example, also add learn view as a goal. Now let's say we also want to reset the input once a goal was added. We could do that by again using our input L and setting value equal to an empty string. This will set the value in the input element to an empty text and therefore clears it. So with that, if we reload again and I finish the course, now this would be cleared. Now that's just JavaScript, no view in action, and it's obviously a very, very, very trivial demo website. Still, we will now use Vue, and you'll thereafter see why Vue might be quite interesting, as it makes building websites more fun. I'll then also talk about the differences between Vue and this approach. But first of all, let's switch to Vue in the next lecture. So in order to switch to Vue, I will mark all that code and comment it out, which you can do by selecting this all and then going to edit and then toggle line or block comment. I used line comment here. So now this code will not have any effect anymore. I'm not deleting it so that we can still see it and compare it, because now I want to use Vue. For that, we first of all need to add Vue. We need to import Vue. We can do this from Vue.js.org, and on this page, there is this install link on which you can click, which takes you to the official documentation where you find instructions on how to create a Vue project. By the way, in general, the official documentation is really good, so in addition to taking this course, I can only recommend that you also dive into the official documentation after going through this course to dive deeper or refresh certain concepts. But when it comes to setting up a project and getting started, we're here in the Quick Start section, and you find different ways of creating a Vue project. We will learn about different ways throughout this course, but the easiest way is not to install packages as it's mentioned up here. We will do this later. But instead, the easiest way to get started is by simply adding an import to the Vue package from a CDN to your page. And for this, we can grab this script tag here, which you find in the Without Build Tools section, and copy that. And then with this copied, we add this into our index.html file. And you should make sure that the link here, this import link, ends with vue at 3, or view at next, which also gives you version 3. Go to index.html and add that before your script here. So before we execute app.js, add this script with the view CDN above your own script. That will your script allow to use Vue. So now, let's save this file. In app.js, we can use Vue. And now what does use Vue mean? With Vue, we can solve the same problem, if you want to call it like this, in a totally different way. In regular JavaScript, which we used before, we use a so-called imperative approach, which means we define every single step by step, which should be executed by the browser. Get access to the button, get access to the input element, get access to the list element, create a function, add a click event handler to the button, and execute this function if a click occurs. And in that function, get access to the entered value, create a list item element, add the text content, append this list item, clear the value. You see a pattern? We define every single step. With Vue, we have a totally different approach. There, we define the desired end result and the data we will need in our Vue app, and we will leave it up to Vue to figure out what needs to be created or added or changed in the DOM at which point of time. And for that, we need to create a Vue app, which takes control over our HTML code. And we do this by calling Vue, which is a global object that is available thanks to our Vue CDN import, Vue.createApp. So on this global Vue object, we can call createApp. CreateApp takes an object, a JavaScript object, where we configure this Vue app. And when I say configure, I mean things like setting up which kind of data we will use in our Vue app. For example, in this demo, I plan on working with a list of goals, so one piece of data which we'll need is that list of goals. Another piece of data which we'll need is what the user entered here. And we define that data by adding a data property to this object we pass to createApp. And this has to be called data. It actually holds a function as a value, and therefore in modern JavaScript, we can also write it like this, which is the exact same. A property named data which has a function as a value. This function must return an object, and in this object we can then define the data our Vue app should be aware of. As a side note, if this is a bit too fast for you, no worries. We'll walk through all the basics in greater depth in the next module. This here is just a quick overview, which is why I'm not diving super deep into all these concepts at the moment. We'll definitely do that in the next section though. So we need to return an object here, and in here we can simply add the data we want to manage in this app. This would be a goals array, which initially is empty, as a key value pair, and the entered value, which initially is an empty string. And now these two pieces of data are pieces of data Vue is aware of, and that will become important later. Now we can connect this entered value with this input by adding a special so-called directive on the input, a special HTML attribute, and that would be the v-model attribute. That's not a default attribute which is supported by HTML. This will only be understood by Vue. And as a value, we repeat the name of this property, entered value. This will establish a connection between this input and the value being entered there and this data property. And Vue will manage this for us. It will automatically listen to what the user enters, and it will automatically update this input whenever we change entered value in code, for example. And that's of course way more convenient than manually reaching out to the input and managing all of that. But this is just the first step. Now upon a button, we want to make sure that we get what's currently stored in entered value and add this to goals. For this, we can add another key value pair to this object we're passing to createApp, and that's the methods key, which now holds an object. In here, we can define methods functions that should be callable from inside the HTML code. So for example, here we can add an add goal method, and in there, then reach out to goals and add the currently entered value. We can do this with this goals and then push, since goals is an array, this entered value. In case you're wondering why this refers to this object, Vue will establish the connection behind the scenes. It does some magic for us here, though throughout the course we are going to explore and also understand that magic. Now add goal should be triggered whenever this button is clicked. And instead of manually reaching out to the button element and adding a click listener as we did it before with just JavaScript, with Vue we can simply add another special attribute to the button element, the v-on attribute. Then we add a colon and then the name of the event to which we want to listen, in this case, click. And then as a value, we specify the name of the method that should be triggered when the item on which we added this special attribute is clicked. So in our case, add goal, just like this. With that, Vue will make sure that add goal, this method, gets executed whenever this button is clicked. And it will then automatically give us the currently entered value and add it as a new value to goals. And now there's only one thing that remains. We wanna output our goals here in this unordered list. And for that, we wanna create list items here, one for every goal. And with Vue, as I mentioned, we define the desired end result, not how we get there. So again, we want to have a list item at the end. That's our desired result, but of course not just one. And Vue get the v4 attribute, which we can add on an element to replicate this element multiple times. And here, between the double quotes, we then need to write goal in goals to in the end loop through all our goals here and create one list item per goal. And we get access to that goal, for which we're currently creating one, in this goal variable. Now we can output this goal with another special syntax understood by Vue. And that's double curly braces, opening and closing, and between them, goal. So this name here. And that will now replicate list item as often as needed and then output one goal per goal entry we have in this goals array. And if we now saved it all and reload, you'll see absolutely nothing. Instead, you just see that curly brace thing which I just entered. The reason for that is that this Vue code will be correct, but Vue doesn't know where that code should have an effect, where it should be applied. That's why on this created app, here, after the closing parentheses, we need to call mount and let Vue know which part of the page should be controlled by that Vue app. And conveniently, I got a div here with the ID app, which contains all the markup that uses the Vue features I explained over the last minutes, where I use all the special attributes, for example. This div with the ID app contains all that code. So it's this div that should be controlled by this Vue app. And therefore, to mount, we pass a string with a CSS selector selecting one element in the DOM, and since we have the ID app on that div here, we can use the ID selector for the ID app like this, with hash and then app. And if we save this now and reload again, now this looks differently. And if I finish the course, that's added. If I learn Vue, that's being added. And if I want to reset the input, I can simply set this entered value to an empty string. And Vue will automatically reach out to the DOM and make the required updates. So again, learn Vue, and it's clear. Finish the course, and it's cleared. And now this is Vue taking over. Now there is certainly a lot of magic in there at the moment, but the key thing is that with Vue, we just define the end result and we use these special features in the HTML code to connect HTML to data and logic managed in the Vue app. And we will learn about a lot of features Vue has to offer to us, which allow us to build any kind of app. And being able to do this and follow this declarative approach, where we declare the result instead of the steps of getting there, that allows us to build super large applications without any issues. Whereas just JavaScript, if we would have a more complex app, would quickly run into problems. We would quickly face issues there in bigger apps if we would use just JavaScript. And writing an application that's error-free and offers great performance would be difficult with just JavaScript. With Vue, it'll be easy. And in this course, you're going to learn all about Vue. So now that we had a first look at Vue, let me quickly walk through what you'll find in this course to give you an overview of all the content in this course, and then we'll dive deeper into Vue. Now in this lecture, I want to talk about the development setup I'll be using. I already mentioned that I work with Visual Studio Code, which is this editor which I would recommend that you also use, and in there I showed you that I use the dark plus color theme. Now I'm not using any other special settings here, which you should know, but I will use one shortcut from time to time, which is really handy. So under Preferences, Keyboard Shortcuts, you can search for Format Document. And this shortcut, which you can bind in case you don't have it yet, will automatically format the code to make it a bit more readable. For example, if that would be indented, it would work technically, but it would be a bit strange. It would look strange. It would be a bit hard to read. With that shortcut, it will be reformatted. And in case that's not working for you, you can also go to Vue Extensions to browse the extensions marketplace and search for Prettier there. And make sure you install that Prettier code formatting extension. If you do that, once you installed it, if you reload, that format shortcut should work for you. You can ensure that Prettier is getting used for formatting by going to Preferences, Settings, and then there search for Format, and under Editor, Default Formatter, make sure Prettier VS Code is selected. That's one setting I would recommend that you use to have more readable code. And that's it. This is the setup I will work with, and this is the editor you will see me using throughout this course. So, what is in this course then? What does this course have to offer? Well, a lot. This is a huge course. I completely updated it with the release of Vue Free, and I'll keep updating it, and it has tons of content. We'll take a deep dive into Vue, and we'll start at the absolute basics. No prior Vue knowledge is required for this course, and we will walk through all these important basics step by step. We will have modules, course sections, where we explore the base syntax, templates, directives, working with data and methods, computed properties and watchers, and you will learn what all these things are and how to use them and how they work together. And this will give us the foundation, so to say. Now we'll also thereafter explore intermediate concepts. We're going to explore components and component communication. We'll take a look behind the scenes of Vue to see how it works under the hood and to understand its magic. We'll learn how to work with forms and user input, sending HTTP requests, how to implement routing and load different pages in a Vue app, even if it's a single page app. Yes, that sounds strange, but it will work. We'll dive into animations with Vue. And we're not even done thereafter. We'll also explore advanced concepts. We will dive into working with Vuex for state management. We'll explore authentication in Vue apps, how to deploy and optimize your Vue app. We'll have a look at the composition API, which was introduced with Vue Free. And when I say a look, I mean a huge module where we dive super deeply into it. We will learn how we may reuse code with and without the composition API, and that's really not even all. There's so much content in this course. But we'll not just walk through all these topics in theory, instead I prepared dozens of small demos and mini projects for you, which we use in the different modules to learn about different concepts. And we also got multiple bigger course projects where we will start from scratch together and implement all those features in the context of bigger demos, in the context of bigger projects, which you then, of course, for example, could also add to your portfolio. In addition, you'll find assignments and challenges in this course. With challenges, I mean that I will sometimes tell you to pause a video and try something on your own, and you can then do that to practice this on your own. And overall, you will get all the theory and all the practice you need with this course. It's a huge course with tons of content. Now, since it is a huge course, I want to ensure that you get the most out of this course. And for that, I got a couple of tips and tricks. Obviously, I recommend that you watch the videos. It's a video on demand course after all. Watch them at your pace and use the video player controls to speed me up if I'm going too slow or slow me down if I'm going too fast. In addition, I also recommend that you code along. Try things on your own and maybe pause the video and try writing the code for what we're about to add on your own. And even if you don't do that, pause the video from time to time to catch up with me, to code along, or as it just said, also code ahead. You might also need to repeat certain concepts from time to time. This is totally normal. It's a lot of content in this course, and therefore definitely feel free to repeat videos or entire sections if something is unclear or you forgot about a certain concept. With the big course projects we have throughout this course, though, you will also often get a chance of seeing all the concepts you learn coming together in one project, though. So that will also help with understanding these concepts and seeing how they work together. Now, of course, sometimes you might also get stuck. You might face an error or something might be unclear. Two sources I recommend that you consider in such cases would be Google and Stack Overflow. You will find Stack Overflow automatically if you Google. And I'm serious about this. If you face some error message, if something is unclear, put it into Google and search the web. Often you'll find a couple of threads on that problem specifically, and very often that will help you solve your problem. But of course, if you don't find a solution there, if you're stuck, if something is unclear, we also got a Q&A section in which you can ask and answer. And I'm really serious about the answering part. Asking is simple, answering is hard, but ultimately you will learn a lot more if you help your fellow students and you also answer in the Q&A section. Of course, I'm also there to help you and I'll do my very best to provide quick answers on course-related questions, but definitely use this as a forum for discussion. In addition, if you're facing errors, if you get an error in your code, which I don't get in the videos, if you're facing an error, compare your code to mine. You'll find snapshots, code snapshots attached by me on the last lecture of every course module, of every course section. On the last lecture of every section, you'll find code snapshots for the different lectures in that section. And the attachment name will tell you to which lecture it belongs. And you can use these snapshots to compare my code to yours. You can also replace your code with mine temporarily, step by step, to narrow down the issue and find out where your code differs and what might be causing an error. And with that, you got all the tools you need to get a lot out of this course. So let's jump right into the next section where we will start with the basics of Vue.